Welcome back to CFB Cauldron Live. I'm Bubba Wagamuth, and thank you so much for tuning in to our 8th live show now. I'm super excited about tonight's show. We're going to start off with our playoff contenders. I started last week. We're going to do 3 teams each week, just talk about a few of their key games, what they're going to need to make the playoffs. So we're probably going to do 3 teams this week. We're going to do 3 teams next week and continue that for the rest of the regular season. So 3 new teams to talk about tonight. Super excited about that. We're going to look back at our 8 weeks bets from last week, then we're going to look forward to our week 9 bets for this upcoming week, and then we're going to finish with our top matchups of the week. And so I don't want to waste any time. Let's get right into it. First team we're going to be talking about is the Oregon Ducks. Big win this past week against UCLA at home, won by 15, but the game wasn't even really that close. So congratulations to Dan Lanning, Bo Nix, Noah Sewell, and the whole squad out there at Oregon. So what does Oregon need to make the playoffs? So in this scenario that we're going to be looking at, we're going to start off with their key games. So a few key games that you should keep in the back of your mind if you're an Oregon fan or interested in how Oregon would make the playoffs is Washington, which is going to be 11-12. That's a home game. It's going to be Utah, which is going to be 11-19, also a home game. And then the final week of the season, Civil War at Oregon State. That's going to be 11-26. So Washington, why do I think Washington is a key game for the Ducks? Well, Michael Penix and Washington love to throw the football around, which is different than what a lot of Pac-12 offenses do. So I think that could present some challenges to this Oregon defense. I don't think Washington's defense is that great, but I do think that offense could present some challenges to Oregon. So just keep that game in the back of your head. Plus, it's a massive rivalry game. The next game, Utah. We saw what Utah did not once, but twice to the Ducks last season. Utah manhandled them on both lines of scrimmage last year. Oregon's really going to want payback for those 2 bad losses from last season. So that's going to be fun. Utah's traveling up to Autzen Stadium. And then the last one, Oregon State. You can never know what can happen in these rivalry games. So excited for those 3 games. Those are 3 games I'll keep an eye on if I was interested in the Ducks. Now, playoff scenarios. What does Oregon need to happen to get into the playoffs? Because I don't believe they control their own destiny. So what do they need? Well, the first one is pretty obvious. The team has to win out. They're not going to make the playoff as a 2-loss team. They don't have that resume. They don't have that many marquee wins. Now, they can win the Pac-12 with 2 wins because they haven't lost a conference game yet, but they're not going to make the playoffs as a 2-loss team. So what does Oregon need to happen? Oregon needs to win out. Another thing I think they need is they need Georgia to beat Alabama in an SEC championship game, because what does that do? That means Alabama has 2 losses and they're not a conference champion. So in that case, a 1-loss Pac-12 champion like Oregon would be able to make the playoffs. What else does Oregon need to happen? Oregon needs Tennessee to lose 2 games, because right now I think the committee, I know we haven't seen the rankings yet, but the AP poll and the committee really value that win against Alabama for the Vols. So I think a 1-loss Tennessee team, even if they don't make the SEC championship game, may get in over these 1-win or 1-loss conference champions, such as Oregon, or like Oregon could be if they go win out. So I think you need Tennessee to lose 2 games. Now, whether that's South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Georgia, whatever the combination is, you just want the Vols to lose 2 games. Another thing I think you need to happen is you don't want TCU to finish the season undefeated. I think TCU finishes the season undefeated. They're in easily over Oregon. So you need the Horned Frogs to drop a game here from here on to the Big 12 championship. So there's just a few things you need to happen if you're Oregon. Now, the one thing I do believe that will happen is I do believe a 1-loss Oregon team gets in over a 1-loss Michigan team. And why is that? Michigan's out-of-conference schedule was so weak. I mean, Hawaii, Colorado State, UConn. And then also Michigan wouldn't have won their division if they lose to Ohio State, because Ohio State would then proceed to win the Big Ten championship. So I think Oregon's out-of-conference schedule, just them scheduling Georgia and then being a conference champion, because the Pac-12 doesn't have division, so being a conference champion in this scenario would look a lot better on a resume than what Michigan was able to do this season. So that's the positive news for the Ducks. The negative news is you need a lot of stuff to fall your way to make the playoffs. Now, I do think it's completely possible. You just need a little bit of help. Another team that's in a very similar situation that had a big win this past weekend, they're coming off, have a tough schedule coming ahead, but I think that another team we're going to be looking at tonight is Oklahoma State. Now, Oklahoma State had a huge win, as I just mentioned. The defense looked much better in the second half than they did in the first half. Really slowed down Bijan Robinson, even though he didn't get enough carries as he should have. But they did a great job slowing down that Texas offense in the second half. So just a few key games here for the Pokes. They head to Kansas State this weekend. That's obviously going to be 10-29. And then another game is Bedlam. I mean, Mike Gundy's only beaten Oklahoma 3 times in 17 years. I know this isn't the Oklahoma team that he faces most years, or as good as most of the Oklahoma teams he's lost to. but you never know. It's Bedlam. It's called Bedlam for a reason. So Bedlam's obviously a big game, and that's not the last week of the season, which is a little odd. That's going to be 11-19. So first thing Oklahoma State has to do, Oklahoma State also has to win out. I don't think there's a scenario where a 2-loss Oklahoma State team makes the playoffs. I think you also probably rooting for Tennessee to lose 2 games. I don't know the committee's thinking, but if I had to venture to guess, I would say that they would put a 1-loss Tennessee team with a close loss at Georgia. And that's another thing about Oregon. Oregon and Tennessee both play Georgia. That's their common opponent for the season. If Tennessee plays Georgia close, then you have to put a 1-loss Tennessee team in over a 1-loss Oregon team. And whether that logic's solid or not, I think Oregon getting blown out by Georgia does hurt them if Tennessee plays Georgia close. Same thing with Oklahoma State. I think a close loss to Georgia probably gets Tennessee in the playoff over Oklahoma State team. They're both going to have 1 loss. One's going to be conference champion. One won't even win their division, but I still see the committee putting a 1-loss Tennessee team in over a 1-loss Big 10 champion or Big 12 champion such as Oklahoma State. So you need Tennessee to lose 2 games. I think you would love a 2-loss Pac-12 champion, so I think a lot of Oklahoma State fans are rooting for Utah to finish this thing out, just run the table the rest of the season, which would get them into the Pac-12 championship and then winning the Pac-12 championship. So you're rooting for the U tier on out. And then also I think you also need Georgia to defeat Alabama because a 1-loss Georgia team that lost in the SEC championship game is probably going to get in, very similar to last year with Alabama being a 1-loss SEC champion. So you're rooting for Georgia to run the table. Bama had 2 losses. I think those are a few things you need to fall your way. And maybe Oklahoma State gets in over a 1-loss Oregon team. I don't know how the committee would see each of those losses in their eyes. But I think that you're really just rooting for a Pac-12. I think you're just rooting for Utah or maybe UCLA. You're rooting for a 2-loss Pac-12 champion. And I think that really helps your odds in terms of getting into the playoffs. So next team we're going to talk about, the last one we're going to talk about this week, it's going to be the Clemson Tigers. Clemson's a really interesting team because a lot of people, including myself, have Clemson's basically written into the playoff. I mean, we have one of the slots, probably slot 3 or 4, reserved for the Clemson Tigers. A lot of people just think they're going to go run the table, which I also believe that, as I mentioned earlier, and just win the ACC, demolish whoever the Coastal has waiting for them, and walk into the playoff. I think it becomes interesting when Clemson loses, if Clemson loses the game from here on out. But let's first look at their key game. So 11-5, an interesting matchup at Notre Dame. Remember, last time they went to Notre Dame was 2020. They didn't have Trevor Lawrence. He was out with COVID. DJU played fantastic, but they dropped the game against the Irish then. Ended up going to the playoff anyway. Another key game is going to be the final regular season game, 11-26 versus number 25 South Carolina. So that's a big rivalry game. Clemson hasn't lost in a long time, but you never know what can happen in these rivalry games. So those are probably the 2 games. They also play Louisville and Miami. I don't see them struggling in either of those 2, though. So, like I said, you win out, you're in. You're in easily also. You only have to watch the playoff selection show. Clemson's in, they win out, they win the ACC, and also it feels like Clemson's back at that moment. It feels like Clemson, because last year, you remember, they didn't even make the ACC title game. It feels like Clemson had a resurgent year if they went out. Clemson loses, I think it gets a lot messier. If they lose, it can go multiple ways. I think if you lose, you're in the same boat as an Oregon and you're in the same boat as an Oklahoma State. Now, who does the committee think has a better resume out of those 3 teams? If all 3 teams win out, is it going to be Oklahoma State? Even if TCU, maybe they drop a game but still in the Big 12, they would be in the mix. You would probably, most likely, you would have 3 1-loss conference champions if Clemson lose. Now, like I said, I don't think the Tigers are going to drop a game, but just an interesting thing to think about. So that's why I wanted to highlight Clemson. Clemson's path could be very easy, or it could get very murky with a loss here in the final 4 weeks, or even a loss in the ACC title game. I think Drake May potentially could give that Tigers defense some issues, but I still expect them to win the game. And also, I'm expecting North Carolina to win the Coastal, as you can see. So those are the 3 teams we wanted to talk about today. We're going to do 3 more teams next week. We did 3 teams last week. I like just highlighting each team, a few of their key games, and what scenarios they would need to fall their way in order to make the playoffs. So let's move on to our Week 8 bet. So we went 3-3 last week. We haven't had a breakthrough week yet. I think we're going to get there, though. We started off hot this week. We started off 2-0. Virginia at Georgia Tech. That game was rough to watch, but good thing we had the under. First half under hit. That was 23.5. That was a -110 bet. Iowa at Ohio State. That over hit easily. I was surprised that number was that low. I know Iowa was really bad on offense, but Iowa was also really good at defense, and defensive touchdown helped us early for the Hawkeyes in that one. Cincinnati at SMU. Cincinnati was up 2 touchdowns the entire game. SMU had a backdoor cover, and then of course they didn't get the 2-point conversion. I saw Cincinnati. I was watching that game as Cincinnati was driving down the field. I knew I had, or as SMU, my apologies, as SMU was driving down the field, I knew since I had Cincinnati -3, I knew SMU would score a touchdown because they're down 8, and then go for 2 and not get the 2-point conversion because that's just how gambling luck works out, and that's exactly what happened. So Cincinnati did not hit on that one. Purdue lost outright. I didn't know going into the week that Purdue was 0-7 on weeks where Taylor Swift dropped an album. That's my fault. I need to do better research. I will be better checking records of teams when Taylor Swift drops an album going forward. So you can put that loss on me if you picked up that one. Ole Miss at LSU. Ole Miss lost this game, and it wasn't very close either. LSU covered pretty easily here. And then UCF at ECU. This game really surprised me because I thought UCF turned a corner. I thought this offense was clicking. They have weapons everywhere. I thought the defense was a really solid unit that plays great red zone defense as well. And ECU handled them. So congratulations to the Pirates. This game wasn't close, so at least that was good. So let's head on to our Week 9 bets. First game is going to be Virginia Tech at NC State. The best word to describe both of these offenses is anemic. NC State's offense looked pretty anemic with Devin Leary, and they looked even worse without him. So I'm taking the under in this game. This is a Thursday night game. We're going to go to noon on Saturday. TCU right now is 5-1 against the spread. So give me the Horned Frogs in Morgantown. I think they're hot. I think they're going to keep it rolling here for the next few weeks. Miami at Virginia. Give me the Hoos here, plus 2.5. I don't know if a lot of you guys know, but Miami is 0-6 against the spread, against FBS teams. Our one cover this year was a late line, and they covered against Bethune-Cookman, who's a HBCU. So Miami has not covered a single spread against an FBS team. I'm going straight off of those numbers because statistically Miami's the much better team. If Miami doesn't turn the ball over 8 times, they'll probably win this game. But I can't bet on a team that is 0-6 against the spread. So give me the Hoos here at home. And Miami also really struggles with Virginia historically. Look at the record of Miami since they've joined the ACC. They're only a game or 2 up on Virginia, which is really shocking. But the Hoos always seem to play them tough. So give me Virginia here at home. SMU at Tulsa. I don't know if Tanner Mordecai is going to play. Preston Stone's a really good backup. He played really good in relief. But I still think Mordecai's probably the better fit for that offense. I really like Tulsa's receiving core also. So give me the Golden Hurricane money line. It's a plus 110 bet at home this week. Wake Forest at Louisville. This line really surprised me. I was expecting this to be 7.5 up. So I'm glad I got the number at 4. But Sam Hartman and the Wake Forest team is one of the oldest in all of the FBS. Hartman's an experienced quarterback, and Louisville isn't that great. Louisville only has 2 conference wins. They've really struggled at certain times of the year. So give me Wake Forest on the road here, -4. I think the Deacs win easily by 10 points or more. And then Pitt at North Carolina. This was another line that really surprised me. I mean, basically what the odds makers are telling you here, the Pitt would be favored by 3 at home, which I would also take Carolina on because I think Carolina wins the game outright no matter where it's played. Carolina has a really explosive offense. I think Pitt's defense is solid. They have a really good defensive line. Secondary is shaky. I expect for Drake May to throw for a lot of yards. And this Pitt offense is not very good. I mean, this Pitt offense has looked bad against Georgia Tech. They look bad against Louisville. Israel Abanikanda ran for 1,000,000 yards against Virginia Tech, so that game's a little skewed. But look at the 2 out of the last 3 games. This Pitt offense does not look good. So give me the Tar Heels here at home. So now we're going to move on to our top matchups of the weekend. Starting off at number 3, as we always do, we're going to go Ohio State at Penn State. What am I going to be looking for this game? One thing I'm going to be looking for is this Penn State offense. Can they keep up the production they had from last week? Now, if you didn't know, Minnesota was one of the top defenses in the entire country last week. Or not last week, but this entire season, actually. Penn State went out and scored 45 points and looked pretty good doing it also. They were able to run the ball well. Nick Singleton was able to average more than 6 yards per carry. I still think he needs to get the football more, especially against a team like Ohio State. But just as a whole, as a unit, can Penn State keep this momentum that they have going on the offensive side of the football? Another thing is, how does Penn State slow down this Ohio State offense? Because this Penn State defense got gashed by Michigan, and now they're just going to go face the best offense in the entire country. So what can Penn State do? Now, if I had to guess, Ohio State's going to come out and try to establish the run because they saw Michigan do it. Michigan ran for over 400 yards on Penn State. And this Manny Diaz defense, if you know anything about this Manny Diaz defense, it's very aggressive, it's downhill, it's an attacking style defense, which sometimes means you leave gaps open, you allow big runs. If you just want evidence of that, go back and watch the 2020 game where Javonte Williams and Michael Carter ran for 500,000 yards on that Hurricanes defense led by Manny Diaz. So teams can gash Manny Diaz on the ground. Now, occasionally they'll get plays, they'll get tackles for loss, but usually they give a lot of run yards. So I expect Ohio State to run the football heavily at the beginning of the game. But Penn State, what do? Do you play your attacking style defense, or do you get more conservative? Do you play more of a shell defense? Do you try to make Ohio State matriculate the ball down the field, much like Notre Dame did? I thought Notre Dame did a great job of not allowing explosive plays. I think Penn State has to do something similar. But that's not in Manny Diaz's DNA, and it's not in his defense's DNA. So I'm excited to see how Penn State comes out this week on defense. Next game we're going to be talking about is Oklahoma State traveling to the Little Apple to take on Kansas State. Now, there's only really going to be one thing I'm looking for, and it's going to be looking for this man right here. Does Adrian Martinez play? Because that really sways the way I look at this game. I think Oklahoma State's going to be favored if it's announced that Martinez is not playing, and the head coach came out and said that the decision will be made Thursday. So look out tomorrow to see if Adrian Martinez is playing, see if the line moves. I'm sure the line will move in favor of Kansas State if he is. I'm sure it'll move in favor of the Pokes if he isn't. So I'm really just looking for Adrian Martinez. Does he play or does he not? Because that really determines the way that I'm going to pick this game and look at this game heading into it. But it's just going to be a great Big 12 matchup. I'm excited to watch it. That's really all I have to say about this game. I think it's going to be a great game, though. Last game, and also the number one game of this weekend I'm looking forward to watching is Kentucky at Tennessee. I think the most important part about when you play a team like Tennessee is just keeping the offense off the field. Whether that's your defense forcing turnovers, getting stops, or I think sometimes the best defense is your offense. I think that's the case in Kentucky. If you watch Kentucky, their offense isn't very explosive, but they're methodical, even though they don't run the ball, which is a strange mix, but they move the ball down the field very slowly, which I think helps against a team like Tennessee. Also taking advantage of opportunities that Tennessee gives you. If Tennessee turns the ball over, which they don't do a lot on offense, you have to go get 7 points off of that. If you have a 10-minute drive, make sure you finish with touchdown. I think things like that are going to be important for Kentucky, not only to stick around, but to pull upsets, because the Tennessee offense can score fast. And then on the flip side of that, how does the Kentucky defense look against this Tennessee offense? So I have an interesting stat here, stat time. Kentucky's 14th in total defense so far in 2022. Number 15 right now is Alabama. So we see how a team in the top 15 in total defense fared against this Tennessee offense. We're going to see how the Cats fare this week. Now, the one thing I will say is I think Kentucky will be smart how they play Tennessee. Alabama was very aggressive on the outside. They would leave safeties one-on-one with slot receivers. I mean, you saw a lot of DeMarco Hellams trying to guard Jalen Hyatt downfield, which I don't think you want if you're an Alabama defender or an Alabama fan or coaching staff. No one wanted to see that on the Alabama side. I think Kentucky's going to be really smart. I think they're going to limit explosive plays. They'll probably give up a lot of yards because they're going to give Tennessee a lot of running yards. They're going to give them a lot of easy passing yards. But I think Kentucky's just trying to limit explosive plays because we see what explosive plays can do. We were able to see the Alabama game, so I think that's going to be the goal of this Kentucky defense. So, number one matchup of the weekend. Super excited to watch both these teams play. I think it could be a little bit closer. I wouldn't be too surprised if Kentucky covered the spread just because of the style of football they play. So that's all we have for tonight. This weekend I'm heading to Florida, Georgia. Super excited. First time in a few years I've been. Don't know if it's going to be a great game or not, but everyone's going to have a great time. So hope you have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend of football.